you said, like one thing I always want to talk about is geography of Taiwan. So Taiwan has the central mountains, right, and then you have these lowland, coastal lowland areas, which is like fertile for rice agriculture, and so through most of the Qing rule, the Chinese settlers from mainland, they mostly settle on the lowland areas. So like you say, most of the mountains are still remain in the hands of indigenous people, and the imperial rule rarely extends to them, which would create a problem when Japan start to expand, because when Japan, first is the status. There's the status of a kingdom of Ryukyu, which is north of Taiwan. The Okinawa, or most people know as Okinawa. The Ryukyu island chain were kind of taken over by, I believe, the Satsuma clan in the 1600s, because basically then, because Ryukyu it's a major producer of sugar, and also, more importantly, as a trade hub that can trade directly with China. But for most of Qing Dynasty, Japan intentionally, kind of let the Ryukyu kingdom keep kind of its ambiguous dual status as both vassals of China and Japan, because then they could trade with China through Ryukyu, through Okinawa. But after the Meiji Restoration in Japan, right, the decision was made to basically annex the kingdom of Ryukyu, to make it so instead of kingdom of Ryukyu, it became the Okinawa prefecture, and it formally incorporated into Japan. And there was, in the 1870s, there was an incident where a bunch of Ryukyuan sailors from Okinawa got shipwrecked off the coast of Taiwan on the east coast, right? And then they were killed by the headhunting tribes of indigenous Taiwanese.
People who got shipwrecked, depending on their luck, some would, there were cases of that happening. There were also cases of them being accepted into indigenous society and then living among them for a few years before they ended up, one way or another, going back to Japan.
Yes, but what happened is the Japanese government used that as an excuse to launch an expedition against Taiwan. And at the time, the Qing government itself was on very shaky legs. So we're moving up to 1870s, right? And I kind of skipped the part that were so basically Taiwan remained like a kind of prefecture of the Fujian, part of the Fujian province for a long time, until 1880s, because there was a period of time in let's talk about 1870s first. So the Japanese sent an expedition to Taiwan, ostensibly because Ryukyuan sailors got killed by indigenous tribes, but really they just want an excuse to annex Taiwan as well. And Qing government at the time was also on its last legs. There has been, opium wars happened between the first opium war happened in 1840s, the second opium war happened in 1860s, and in between there was a massive Taiping Rebellion, which was supposedly the bloodiest civil war in the 19th century. It took hundreds of millions of lives. And then,
speaking of rebellions, they also happen quite frequently
in Taiwan. Yes,
yeah, 3年一番5年一乱.
Yes.
Or a rebellion every 3 years and chaos every 5 years.
Yes, so the Qing rule in Taiwan is actually quite tenuous, because Yanlong Emperor, right, like one of the supposedly during the High Qing, the peak of Qing power, Yanlong Emperor had himself celebrate 10 great campaigns of Qianlong 10大征. The one of the 10 great campaign of Qianlong was putting down a rebellion on Taiwan. Because apparently at the time it was a big scale rebellion. The guy, surname Lin, I forgot his full name, but he started a whole island.
That narrows it down to nobody in Taiwan.
Yeah, he started a whole island rebellion and pretty much took over the whole island. So the Qing had to launch a navy again from Fujian and basically put down that rebellion. And
What year was that?
this was during Qianlong's. This is part of the Qianlong's 10 Great Campaigns of Qianlong. If you if you look on Wikipedia, you should be listed there.
Because I want to backtrack a little bit and say that, like, we talked about earlier how the Qing were kind of confused as to what to do with Taiwan. Some people said keep it, some people said don't. But then they were also really concerned that Taiwan would once again, like with the case of Zheng Chenggong, be a base for anti-Qing forces.
Yes. Yeah.
So then that's why they limited mainland Chinese immigration to Taiwan. And then for a while, it was like only single men could go, and they weren't allowed to bring their families over.
Because they didn't want the Chinese people to settle on the island. But what they ended up kind of like the first generation of Chinese immigrants to United States,
America.
because the first generation of Chinese labor to United States were men who were there to build railroads, and then it was like immigration was cut off through the Chinese Exclusion Act. Right, you can't bring women in, and you created this large population of bachelors, and
Chinese did the Chinese Exclusion Act first for Taiwan. We invented it.
Yeah. So, So
that didn't stop illegal immigration to Taiwan, though. They still figured out ways to go.
Yeah. Because Qianlong had all these prohibition. He also stopped prohibited Han Chinese migration into Manchuria. Officially, but that's illegal immigration still went down. Like during the early Qing, there was still a couple million people made it to Manchuria despite the official ban. But that this is part kind of like the history of China, right? Like there's 上有对策，下有
上有政策，下有对策。
上有政策 There's a policy above, and there's a
counter policy.
Yeah, counter policy from below. Or the other one is 山高皇帝远. The mountains are far, the emperor. The mountains are high, the emperor is far away. So so often the facts on the ground are quite different from what's described in the imperial decree. So I'm also looking up the 10 Great Campaigns of Qianlong. So
while you're doing that, I'll just kind of talk a little bit of what went on during the Qing Dynasty. So
please.
After I think after the establishment of Taiwan province, or before. Okay, I'm a little bit muddy on this. I'm sorry, but basically the most important Qing governor of Taiwan was Liu Mingchuan. He basically led a modernization campaign. He, improved the roads and railways. He opened up the first post office, which is pretty interesting because the post office of the Republic of China was a direct continuation of the Qing Dynasty post system, and then the whole ROC postal system got relocated to Taiwan. So, yeah.
But this is much later though, because this is almost like modern.
Oh, no, this is right before this is leading up to the time Taiwan was ceded to Japan.
Yes,
basically
because at the time,
the Han Chinese population grew from relatively little to more than 2 million by the time by 1811.
Yes.
And there were
and
wait, let me look at the numbers here. I took too many notes. I can't find things.
Yeah. So while you're finding things, let me just go back real quick to the Taiwan Rebellion during reign of Emperor Qianlong. So it's actually officially called the Lin Shuangwen Sijian, or the Lin Shuangwen Rebellion. It occurred between 1787 and 1788. And so basically the Qing governor of Taiwan at the time discovered the existence of the secret society, the anti-Qing secret society, Tiandi Hui, the Heaven and Earth Society. So while he was acting to suppress the secret society, the remaining members decide to launch a preemptive rebellion. And Lin Shuangwen declared himself king, and quickly the revolt attracted 50,000 people on Taiwan, and in less than a year, they occupied almost the entire part of southern Taiwan. So this is when Qin had to send her fleet from mainland again, expedition to Taiwan to put it down, and they actually had to send 20,000 soldiers, which is almost like the force.
Basically, Joshua Wong, if you're listening to this, you ain't shit.
Yes, because the rebellion actually eventually had as many as 300,000 people took a part in the rebellion, and it took over most of the Taiwan, and this was 1780s, right? So like very in another 100 years, the Taiwan will we coming to the time. Coming back to time to 1870s. So right now we're basically talking about around this time there was a modernization effort happening both in China and in Japan, right? In China as a result of the Taiping Rebellion and the Opium Wars, and in Japan as a result of the U.S. Admiral Commodore Perry forcing Japan to open its ports to trade with his black ships in 1860s, I believe, or 1850s, and then this two modernization efforts in China and Japan will come to a head eventually in the First Sino-Japanese War. But before that, immediately after the Japanese Meiji Reform restoration, which Japan took embark on this like full-scale westernization program, they decided, the way to beat the Western power is to become imperialist powers themselves. So first they did is, annex Okinawa, and then Taiwan became another target. They use the excuse of Ryokan sailors shipwreck and being killed on Taiwan to launch an expedition. And at this time, China was still recovering from the Taiping Rebellion, and at the time it was also recovering from this huge northwest Muslim rebellion in the northwest China. And China at the time was debating what to do about Xinjiang, because Xinjiang in the between 1864 and 1870s was being like the Qing imperial authority completely collapsed, and there was a Central Asian adventurer Jakob who led his force from Fergana Valley in what would be today Uzbekistan into Xinjiang, and he set himself as a new king, basically a new emir over most of Xinjiang, and the Qing government was considering to, after they finally quelled the great Muslim rebellion in northwest China in parts of Gansu and Shanxi, they decide to send in Zhuo Zongtang to move into Xinjiang to reclaim it, and that's so at this juncture, and also Russia took this opportunity to occupy part of northern Xinjiang around the Yili Valley. So at this juncture, Qing didn't want it to deal with another front with Japan in southeast, and it's the Qing official kind of tried to use an excuse to brush it off, saying, like this, the people who committed the murder of the Ryokan sailors, they're these Taiwanese Aborigines. We actually have no control over them, right? So it's not really our responsibility. But in a way, by saying that, Qing basically kind of gives the Japanese further excuse that they don't control the parts of Taiwan where the Aborigines reside, and in addition, kind of accept Japanese annexation of Ryukyu Kingdom by saying that Japan has a right to intercede on behalf of Okinawa. And so Japan sending an expedition regardless, but eventually, like the Americans got involved, and Japan was persuaded to withdraw, but Qing has to pay them the expedition cost. But that was kind of the first taste of Taiwan for Japan. And then in 18 and then in 18 so in 1884, China then got involved into another war with another European power. This was a Sino-French war over basically status of Vietnam, because Vietnam, France was pushing to basically colonize full of Vietnam, and Vietnam as a vassal state of Qing, the Vietnamese emperor basically sent asked for help from the Qing imperial court as a vassal of Qing, and then Qing sending force into Vietnam to fight the French, and as part of the Sino-French War, Taiwan got involved too, because the French expanded the war to the southeast Chinese coast, and they sent a navy to blockade Taiwan, and they send an invasion force to land on Penhu Island, also land on Taiwan. And as a result of this, after the conclusion of, and one of the reasons, the Qing finally concluded peace with France, and despite a victory over the French forces on the Chinese Vietnamese border, still acknowledge basically the French rule over Vietnam, is because this French blockade of Taiwan. The Qing weighed the two and feel, okay, Taiwan is more important than the vassal state of Vietnam, and we got to keep Taiwan. And as a result of first Sino-French War, Taiwan was made into a full province, like a full. Before it was a prefecture of Fujian, and in 1887, right? So a couple years after the conclusion of Sino-French War, Taiwan was made into a full province of China.
But that didn't last long.
That didn't last long, because now we're running up against the first Sino-Japanese War, which broke out in 1894 over status of Korea, because Japan first expanded south to annex Ryukyu Islands, aka Okinawa, and
this
then,
is very important because Korea has played a pivotal role in the status of Taiwan with the rest of China, and this won't be the first time it happens again, as we can see. We'll get to that later.
Yes, because then Japan wants to, this next target is Korea, but Korea, again, like Vietnam, was a vassal of China. So then the Qing imperial court sends in troops into Korea to respond to the Japanese threat, and then the Sino-Japanese War explode on Korean Peninsula, and then but the Qing army was decisively defeated on land and on sea. The Qing Navy, the Beiyang fleet, was almost wiped out. And right after that, Japan first moved to annex Diaoyu Islands. The Diaoyu Islands are set of islands that's sitting between the Okinawa island chain and Taiwan.
What's interesting though about what's interesting about the Diaoyu Islands?
Yeah.
Nowadays? Yeah, because Japan still claims that it belongs to Japan, but when Taiwan was a colony of Japan, they were administered as part of Taiwan.
Yes, because it's closest to Taiwan, and Diaoyu Islands was at the time, on the old maps of Japan, it was actually marked as not part of Kingdom of Ryukyu, and in fact, even after Japan annexed Kingdom of Ryukyu in 1870s, they still did not mark the Diaoyu Islands as theirs. They waited until the Qing Navy, the Beiyang fleet, was wiped out in the Sino-Japanese War in 1894. Then they moved in to claim those islands. And
they call them the Senkaku Islands.
Yes, and the Senkaku Islands is actually a direct translation of its English name, Pinnacle Islands, into Japanese. because Senkaku means pinnacle. It's just a direct translation of the English name Pinnacle Islands, because they didn't want to use the old name Diaoyu Islands to remind of its Chinese origin. And and then because the as a rapper as basically war booty, Japan demanded not only the Korea's official independence from China, but it essentially became a colony of Japan. But also they demanded the southern half of Manchuria, the Liaodong Peninsula, as payment, and which Qin agreed to. But because Russia wants whole of Manchuria to itself, it couldn't have had let Japan to have a foothold in southern Manchuria. So Russia, Tsarist Russia, together with France and Germany, they send a fleet to Japan, basically at gunpoint, force Japan to resign their claim on southern Manchuria, give it back to Qin. Of course, China had to pay another huge amount of silver to Japan for that honor, to redeem back Liaodong Peninsula. But in return, Qin were to give Taiwan as kind of compensation, compensation to Japan. So then Taiwan used to become a Japanese colony. But when the news first traveled to Taiwan that this happened, that people were very indignant that they didn't want to become part of Japan. So what the locals did at the time is, because the Qing government signed this treaty, to cede the land to Japan. So they decided, okay, we don't want to become part of Japan. We actually don't want to be cut off from China. What we're going to do is we're just going to declare independence. We'll call it the Republic of Taiwan. So this is a real Republic of Taiwan.
They called it the Democratic Republic of I think it's translated most in the West to Republic of Formosa, but in Chinese it's Taiwan 民主国.
Yes.
So the Democratic Republic of Taiwan is the Chinese name for it.
Yes. So basically, it's like the local officials. They made the Qing governor the first president, and the whole point of setting up the Declaration of Independence is they didn't want to be part of Japan.
It was a pro-Chinese government.
Yes, exactly. And so his first president was actually the previous Qing governor, and there was also the head of the Black Flag Army. What's his name? I can't remember now. The Black Flag Army used to be a kind of remnant of the Taiping Rebellion, and they got pushed out of China into Vietnam after the failure of Taiping Rebellion, and they kind of established themselves as a big power base in kind of the border region between Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. And then when the French move in to fully colonize Japan, they become a major opposition force to the French colonial force, and they kind of fought as part of proxy of Qing. But after the Sino-French treaty was concluded, Qing, they didn't want this Black Flag Army sitting on its border, so they sent the Black Flag Army to Taiwan, and it's just right around like 10 years later, of course, the Sino-Japanese War broke out, and the Black Flag Army, they also organized some local militias to resist the Japanese invasion. In fact, there's a Hakka movie called 1894 that described this invasion of Taiwan by the Japanese army. This
is not really mentioned nowadays in Taiwan because of the political agenda of certain groups of people, unfortunately.
Oh, of course. But I wanted to talk about this bring up this movie. One is because I think this is one of the first Hakka language movie to come out of Taiwan, and It's about a very specific period of Taiwan history. It's about the kind of the Taiwanese resistance to the Japanese colonial rule as it first was imposed. So I'm trying to remember. I think the Chinese name is 1890, or maybe 1895, because 1895 is when Japanese moved in. Let me
Yeah.
see,
And another
1895.
movie I want to mention that I know you know about is Warriors of the Rainbow or Seryok Bale.
Yes, yes. So I
It
want to.
portrays it's not about this necessarily, but it does portray the fall of the Taiwanese Republic
Yes,
in
I did the
1895.
first in like the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So
It's a
so
little bit longer in the director's cut.
oh yes, yes. So so 1895, or in English name it's called Blue Braves: The Legend of Formosa, 1895. It's a Hakka language film out of Taiwan about based on the Japanese invasion of Taiwan in 1895. Because what happened is Qin Dynasty imperial government have given up. They were defeated, and they would agree to give Taiwan to Japan, but the people, the Chinese society on Taiwan did not want to be Wangguonu, right? They did not want to be subjugated to Japan, so they declare independence, founding the so-called the Republic of Taiwan, and then then Japan sent an army to Taiwan to formally bring the island under its control.
It
And there,
lasted 5 months.
I'm sorry.
The independent republic lasted 5 months.
Yes, yes. So those are the 5 months of basically armed resistance against the Japanese imperial forces,
Mhm.
and which was a very formidable force at the time. You easily defeated the Chinese land force, and now you come up kind of this kind of ragtag force of local militias, and yeah, yeah. So people for a more visual aid, people can check out 1895, or the English name. Blue Braves, The Legend of Formosa, 1895, but also the more famous movie, the Warrior Civic Ballet, the Warrior of Rainbow. I'll put the links in the show notes so people can look up
Watch
and
the two-part director's cut if you watch Seryok Bale on Warriors of the Rainbow.
yeah, Civic Ballet is a great movie. I highly recommend. It's
Except the ending was really lame.
Yeah, yeah. So 1895, the Legend of Formosa. That's more about the Hakka resistance of Japanese invasion. But the Civic Ballet, Warrior of the Rainbow, is talking about the real indigenous people of Taiwan, who are these Austronesian speaking Aborigines who rose up against the brutal Japanese colonial rule in
1930s.
1930s. Yes, in 1930s. Both are based on historical events. Civic Ballet is a great movie. I highly recommend. And we have actually gone over to that's my puppy. So sorry, they fight all the time. They like to add a little color. We have actually gone to 2 hour mark. Would you like to continue this our
I
saga
think
of Taiwan?
yeah. My idea is we can just keep on recording until we're tired, and then we can just cut the episode down to I know you usually split your episodes into 2 parts. With this, maybe 2 or even 3 parts would make it work. Especially now that everyone's in quarantine, longer episodes are good.
Oh, you know what? That's a great idea. Okay, so if you want to continue, I'm more than happy to. So
Let's do it.
yeah, okay, let me just check. So we are now, which bring us to 1895, right? The Japanese army has rolled in, and they kind of I'm just checking your notes to make sure you
Once
have
again, there's a debate on how to deal with the people in Taiwan. There were
yes,
two camps in Japan.
yes. Did you want to backtrack a little bit to talk about the separate policies for the Han and the Aborigines under Qin, or do you consider we pretty much covered that already?
I think if we really want to get into it, it would be better for maybe another episode because I need to read up more on that. Because with today I prepare for the political development of Taiwan, and unfortunately, the Aboriginal people have been so subjugated that to really talk about the main trends of political development of like mainstream Taiwan, we would have to leave that as a separate episode, in my opinion.
I mean, I think one of the great thing, also important part about Citic Ballet, the Warrior of the Rainbow, it tells a often not told stories of the Taiwanese Aborigines. They're kind of been almost erased from the debate about the Taiwan relation with mainland China, and
they're tokenized too.
Yes, and because the Taiwanese Aborigines, they were the original people of the land. And a lot of time in English media, when they use the word native Taiwanese, they're actually not talking about Taiwanese Aborigines, the true Taiwanese. They're talking about, the so-called native Taiwanese. They're talking about the
descendants of everyone we talked about up to now.
Yeah. Yes. They're talking
the Chinese descendants of everyone we talked to up till now. So the various forms of waves of immigration, like the Zhang Chenggong and his people, and like the migrant workers, and they were pretty much settler colonists.
Yes. In fact, there are a lot of people trying to make the analogy of Taiwan to certain colony as in the argument that yes, the Taiwan should have a right to independence, just like the 13 colonies had a right to assert independence from Britain. In fact, they are letting on a little bit more true analogy than they realize, because yes, Taiwan is a settler society. It's built upon these settlers from the Chinese mainland who kind of in their process of settling dispossess the Aborigine population, the natives of the land.
And the funniest part is they justify their argument by saying that both the ROC government and the PRC government are the colonizers, while they themselves are the true colonizers of Taiwan.
Yes, they're the first one of the first waves, and because as we mentioned earlier, even during the Qing Dynasty rule over Taiwan, there's a large part of Taiwan which is mountainous that was kind of outside of the imperial rule. So the Qing government official wasn't exactly lying when he says, "Oh, we're not responsible for this Ryukyuan sailors being killed by headhunters because we have no control over the headhunters." But it's a true statement. But when the Japanese imperialists came to Taiwan, they are intent to bring their imperial rule to everyone on Taiwan.
And this is the important point. There, up until then, there wasn't exactly a distinct Taiwanese identity, even among any of the residents in Taiwan, because there wasn't for example, if you lived in the coastal cities of Taiwan, chances are your community had more contact with mainland China, with the people it traded with, than people, let's say, like north or south of you on Taiwan.
Oh, yes. And a lot of the identity back then was more based on, families, on clans.
Yeah, the clans.
Or place of origin. So, like we kind of briefly talked about earlier, there's association among people from Zhangzhou and people from Quanzhou, right? The two major port cities in Fujian from where people departed. And then
it's pretty interesting because they both speak Minnan dialects, but they're a little bit different. Like I've been to Quanzhou. I haven't been to Zhangzhou, but I've heard people from Zhangzhou speak in Xiamen, and my ancestors came from Zhangzhou. But what's interesting is, like the dialect in Xiamen, the dialect in Taiwan can be categorized as like a blend between Zhangzhou speech and Quanzhou speech, with a little gradient depending on where you go. Like if you go to Taipei, it leans more towards Quanzhou. If you go to Tainan, it leans more towards Zhangzhou.
And also of course there's Hakkas from eastern Guangdong, and
they're in like Pingdong and Miaoli.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the Hakkas is they were the first to rebel against the Qin rule in Taiwan. But then after Qin suppressed them, then the Qin used the Hakka militias to put down the other sub-ethnic groups rebellions, and then because then Qin kind of reincorporated the Hakka militias into its own kind of the military system, and that's why during 1895 in Japanese invasion of Taiwan, Hakka militia play a huge role in the local resistance because they're the ones with arms. they're armed and
the stereotype is they're very how do you say, like, they're 很团结. They're really good at unifying with one another and forming like a unified force. That's the stereotype.
Yes. And so this brings us up to the Japanese colonization. Do you want to kind of talk about the Japanese policies, especially the Japanese policy on Taiwan?
Yeah, so at first they were wondering like how they would deal with Taiwanese people. There was the argument that these people were not civilized enough to become Japanese, so we should develop like a whole other set of laws just for them, which is kind of like how the European colonists administered the New World and Africa and India and Indonesia and all of their colonies. So then they actually kind of went that route for the beginning, for the first few decades of Japanese rule. But then things started changing and they moved towards a more of a assimilationist type ordeal. And then like especially during wartime, during World War II, that's when they really stepped it up, which made like the assimilation policy of 1937 seem like they still acknowledged the fact that Taiwanese people were like the Han Chinese people were Chinese and whatever. But the different policies also were what role Taiwan served in the empire. At first, it was a traditional colony where it's like it provided agricultural stuff to Japan, like sugar, rice, and that sort of, that type. But then, whereas industry was for the Japanese mainland, and it's if you study Marx and Lenin, you kind of understand like the development of capitalism, and then how imperialism is the highest form of capitalism and stuff. And because Japan went on the are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah, you just kind of your sound kind of dropped. But basically, as Japan went expansionist for even more, it needed greater industry. So that's when the industrialization of Taiwan really took off. And
I would like to point out that if you discount Okinawa or AKA Kingdom of Ryukyu, Taiwan is actually Japan's first overseas colony.
Yes.
So Japan had a learning curve. At first,
it was the first big colony.
Yeah, it was very. At first, first phase, it was very brutal. Like we talk about, in reference in those two movies, the crushing the local resistance on Taiwan that lasted from 1895 to about 1910s, and after that, the Japanese new colonial governor decided to rule with a little softer hand. So that's when they started to trade the Japanese as Japanese subject, not as Japanese, but as subjects of Japanese empire, not just these kind of conquered people, right? Purely as conquered people. But
and they really developed Taiwan to it became pretty developed under Japanese rule. For example, it had like one of the most comprehensive censuses in all of Asia. Like starting from 1905, they started collecting data every 5 years, and the population doubled between 1905 to 1945 from 3 million to 6 million. And Japan also, for the first time, enacted compulsory education in Taiwan, and school became compulsory for children between ages 8 to 14, and which put Taiwan's attendance rate in school to the second highest in Asia, with the first being Japan proper.
Yeah, and speaking of communism, uh, initially when the communist parties were being kind of sprouting up, the Taiwanese Communist Party were actually placed under the supervision of the Japanese Communist Party because at the time Taiwan was still a Japanese colony. So even though there's maybe more cultural ties Taiwan had with the Chinese mainland, but initially the branch of Taiwanese Communist Party was considered part of the Japanese Communist Party.
Yeah, they got crushed by the Japanese authorities though eventually.
Oh, of course. I mean, like the Japanese rule in Taiwan, they were very quick and brutal in suppressing the dissent. But after a while, they decided, maybe
Allow a little bit of democracy and let them join in like in some government.
yes. I wouldn't call it democracy, but they did.
Well, that's what they tried to. That's why they tried to portray it as.
Yes. Because I mean, Taiwan people on Taiwan, they're still second class citizens of the Japanese
Yeah.
Empire. The Japanese settlers on Taiwan, they are still the first, the conquering race. They're still the first class citizens. They just decide to, give more rights to the locals as kind of the compensation price. And
Oh, speaking of this, that was just a funny story. When I was in high school, I took Japanese, and one of my Japanese teachers was like, "Oh yeah, my grandfather." He was like an older man. He was like in his like middle ages, and he was mid age, and he was like, "Yeah, my grandfather actually worked in Taiwan, and he had so many great memories." I'm just thinking, yeah, he was probably a bastard.
yeah, I was like, 'cause I remember also meeting a Taiwanese woman who this was in the United States, and she was talking about her father. So her father was a kind of employed as a medical professional, maybe even a doctor in the Japanese army during World War II
Mhm.
on mainland China. So he was attached to a Japanese Imperial Army unit, and he was talking about, oh yeah, he met and fall in love with Japanese nurse, but they were separated by war. It's a great love story. And
No, it's not.
I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I just couldn't get over the fact that her dad,
Tenjin.
yeah, her dad worked for the Japanese Imperial Army in China. Like
So,
freaking.
speaking of this, the of like being second class citizens, they weren't allowed to serve in the Japanese army until 1937. And at first in 1937 they were allowed to enlist for support duty. So I guess like your acquaintance's father like being like a nurse or doctor or whatever. And then as things became more desperate, what they allowed Taiwanese people to do was broadened. So then in 1942, they allowed Taiwanese people to volunteer. And then in 1944, that's when there was a full-on draft because they were getting fucked at the end of the war. And that's when my grandmother's brother actually got drafted, and he was sent to Hainan where he died.
Yeah, and it was all across all people in Taiwan, not just
Yeah.
among the Chinese settler population, but also
Yeah.
Aborigine population in the mountains. They were rounded up and
Yeah.
pressed into the Japanese Imperial Army, basically left to die on the islands in the Pacific campaign. Yeah,
Mhm.
and this actually I read 1949 Big River
大江大海.
江大河1949 the
There's also another book called 大江大海骗了你 by Liao.
but what's the English translation of 大江大海?
I don't know. Is there an English translation of that book?
I don't know, but it's kind of semi-famous in the Chinese circles anyway.
You should check out Liao's criticism. I mean, I don't agree with Liao on everything, but he's pretty good at gathering historical information and just like shitting on people.
Oh yeah, okay. It's the English translation is a Big River, Big Sea: Untold Stories of 1949.
They're
So
pretty told.
it's basically a collection of stories written by the Taiwanese author Long Yin-tai, and in 2009. I don't know if there's an English translation. I read in Chinese, obviously. And what I actually find I mean, her political view is shit, but
I agree.
there's some interesting factoids to be picked out from the book. For one is, he talked about her father, being from a rural area in, I believe, Hunan, and like there was famine, before 1940. Like every few years, there's famine in Hunan. And this is way before the the communists took over. And also another fact is about the Aborigine, the people in Taiwan getting drafted in the army. So basically, the Japanese Empire were getting on this last leg. So everybody was getting drafted into the Imperial Army to die for the glory of the emperor. And then just a few years later, 1945, the KMT regime, Chiang Kai-shek's regime, come to Taiwan um, to take over, and then the Chinese Civil War breaks out. So then there's another recruitment drive to recruit people in Taiwan to join the KMT army to fight on the Chinese mainland. And maybe we'll get into it when we get to that part. But there was an interesting story of two Taiwan Aborigines whose older brothers got drafted into the Japanese Imperial Army and died on one of the Pacific Islands, and then themselves got drafted by the KMT in, I think, 1946, 1947, and they got sent to Shandong, which at the time was a big communist base. They got sent with a KMT army to Shandong to try to wipe out the communist base there, and they were being defeated by the communists, and they were captured, and so they joined the PLA,
Nice.
yes, and they actually end up staying on the mainland for most of their lives. They only came back to Taiwan in like
In
1980s.
the 80s, probably.
Yeah, after the martial law was lifted in Taiwan to finally meet their families. So they had, they had mainland spouses and mainland children, but they were still like, when they were I saw an interview on Taiwanese TV of these two guys, and they were still singing like the PLA songs. It was great.
It's actually why I met this person from Qingdao who said that she had relatives in Taiwan. That
Ah,
yeah, could be something related.
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. We'll get to the Chinese Civil War part first.
But I want to talk about the sorry? You're still going to talk about Japan, or do you want to talk about the transfer?
No, let's keep on talking about Japan if you have more to talk about.
Okay, yeah. So basically, kind of Japan helped transform Taiwan from, I don't want to say help, but you know what I mean, like because they had their own reasons, but because of their incentives, they had the incentive to transform Taiwan from like a more agrarian society to a more modern society, a more modernized society.
Yes.
And one of the first things that Japan did was kind of deal with the problem of opium addiction in Taiwan, which was, just like the rest of China, was a pretty big deal. They found out before woke lords in the West that total prohibition doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what they did was they didn't completely ban it, but then they monopolized the opium trade. So then they would only sell to people with government issued permits. Now, some people say that this was just so that the state could monopolize the drug trade, which is kind of true. But regardless, opium addiction dropped significantly, and it might have had to do with increases in the standard of living over time, like after the first chaotic decades were over. And then they also, at the turn of the century, they ended foot binding. It was completely banned in 1915. And then they also targeted the the queues that they had, the Manchurian queues that Chinese people grew, like the shaved head with the ponytail on the back. There was no formal law banning them, but it was strongly discouraged. And also, after the fall of the Qing Empire in late 1911, they just kind of fell out of popularity as well. And Yeah, they and I want to talk about towards the final years.
I just want to
That's what,
interject for a second, talking about
yeah.
Japan ending opium addiction in Taiwan. So, the great anti-communist author Frank Dictor, who like a Dutch historian who's quote unquote specialized on modern China. He wrote on like Mao's Great Famine and win some awards for it. And he actually wrote a book on opium, the exotic commodity, narcotic culture, a history of drugs in China, where he said opium was not that bad for China. It was exaggerated. This is the kind of people who are kind of being fed around in the Western media. It's like,
I guess the opioid crisis in America is not that bad either.
yeah, this is the kind of people who's been fed around with awards and being celebrated in Western media as like China experts. Like, because opium addiction in China was bad. I mean, like it was so bad that even the Japanese imperial government banned the opium trade in its own colony, Taiwan, right? Because at the time they're actually trading Taiwan as its old provinces versus at the time in Manchuria in China itself during World War II, Japan was actually actively running opium trade. You had this like huge, massive opium network,
Which is why I buy the theory that Japan enacted the way the policy worked in Taiwan was to make it so that there were less addicts within the colony, but then they could also monopolize the trade.
Yes. I never thought about that, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to keep talking about the
Yeah.
Japanese policies?
And I talked about the assimilation. So I mean that kind of just happened with education and culture, So, but then in 1937, that's when they really ramped things up. Now, from 1937 to 1945, they had what was called the Kominka movement, or the Japanization movement, which they encouraged people to become formal subjects of the emperor. Now, this kind of coincided with their war efforts because they really needed to instill a Japanese identity in the Taiwanese, because what were they trying to do? They were trying to invade China. Now, if these people had a cultural affinity to China, it's kind of like if we got drafted by the U.S. military to go fight Chinese people, we probably defect. Right?
Anyway, so there's
whereas Gordon Chang, because he's like all assimilated and stuff, he wouldn't defect. He would just be like, "Oh, I'm here to spread freedom and democracy." And
so the Chinese reading of this of these the Chinese characters of
皇民化运动.
yeah, 皇民化运动. This people Chinese speaking speakers will be more familiar with that. Yeah, basically brainwashing the Taiwanese into sacrificing their lives for the greater glory of the emperor.
And they encouraged people to, but then like it was a movement, but then only 2% of the population formally became Huangmin, and there was like a process. You had to meet certain criteria, like your family had to be what they called them 国语家庭, or people who speak the national language, which was Japanese.
Yeah,
and then they had to observe Japanese customs. They had to convert to Shintoism and stuff. And then once you became a formal Huangmin, or subject of the emperor, then your status would rise above a typical Taiwanese, but you were still not quite Japanese.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But then during that time, people were just encouraged to speak Japanese, wear Japanese clothing,
They have to adopt Japanese names, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then, but then like, they still had like Chinese names, like, obviously, but then like real Huangmin, they just kind of it was even more formalized. And not with real Huangmin, it wasn't just a matter of adopting a Japanese name. You had to go through a little ceremony where you go and like you renounce your Chinese ancestors, and like I think even like tombstones and stuff like that, and then you traded them for a new set of Japanese ancestors.
Wow. Wait,
yeah.
Did Li Denghui's family, the
yes.
former...
Yes.
Really? So his family officially became Huangmin, a subject of the emperor.
I'm 90% certain.
Okay.
He
Okay.
certainly acts that. He certainly acts that way still.
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. I mean, this guy is just
Judas
amazing.
among Judases.
Yeah, I mean, like before, I thought, oh, these must be all, just communist propaganda against trying to smear his name, Li Denghui's name, and or maybe like his KMT enemies trying to smear his name. And once I start to read what he actually says, it was like, oh my god, this guy's for real. He really, treasure his memories as a subject of the emperor of the Japanese emperor. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
When I
Yeah.
was like 2 years old, my dad really hated Li Denghui, and he bought a dog and named him Li Denghui. But then I was scared of dogs, so then my mom made him give it back.
Take back Li Denghui, please.
Yeah, but for like 2 days of my life, I had a dog named Li Denghui. I
Oh,
know.
great.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and this is a lot of it is done through education, right? A lot
Yes.
of the
Yes.
brainwashing. Yeah.
Yes. Like for example, my grandfather, it's kind of weird because my maternal grandfather's mother came from a Qing a Qing court family, like from the imperial Qing court. So then they
Yeah,
had
yeah,
that.
like the Mandarin officials. Yeah.
Yeah. They were that. Whereas but then like by the time my grandfather's generation, my grandfather was born in 1930. He was born in 1930, and he pretty much
Hmm.
grew up playing with Japanese kids and speaking, like learning Japanese. But because after the end of the war, when he became an adult, he did business in Japan, and Japanese people couldn't tell that he was not Japanese. Whereas like the average Taiwanese, when they spoke Japanese, they could still kind of tell, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
anyways, it was that going on, and it's really the generation that like spent their formative years in the 30s and 40s that really became like just more assimilated, truly assimilated, more so than their previous generations into Japanese culture. Now and then we can get into during the final years of World War II, there was US bombings on Japan. And
yeah.
Taiwan, because
Yes, yes, because there were actually, yeah, so at the time, U.S. actually built air bases. So one of the goal of the Pacific campaign to leapfrog is to take over these islands so they can build air bases to creep closer and closer to bomb mainland Japan. But in also in parallel to that effort, the American Air Force were actually building air bases in China, like this mostly southwest China, the part that's unoccupied by Japan. Then use those parts to bomb Japanese occupied
yes,
territory, like
which is
in
why
China. Yeah,
certain Taiwanese separatists use that to say that hey, Chinese people were responsible for bombing us during World War II, which is true because there were Republic of China pilots who joined that, but then it was because they were a United States ally. It was like which is stupid because like then they don't apply the same standards to Americans.
yeah, and they don't think about the or the Taiwanese who serve in the Japanese Imperial Army who got sent over to China, and there were a few of them too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's that's
yeah,
why there's I want to get into that later about historical revisionism and why and how that plays a role in today's politics. Now, a lot of those air raid campaigns, I just want to share stories. It was my grandmother was she was born in 1932, so she was around she was in her early teens when that happened, and her education was interrupted because there was like a whole year or two where she didn't really go to school. Like all they did was just prepare for aerial attacks, and she actually did go through a few of them. Like she would tell me where certain like when we were walking around Tainan, my mom's hometown, she would tell like which certain areas were bombed, and like how if like so and so someone she knew or some family member had gone to meet a certain friend at a certain day, they would have died. And
Yeah, I mean, like people, like, these are really just the tragedy of
Yeah.
the war, which Japan initiated, and but like the way that some of these people, separatists in Taiwan, you politicize it, it's like basically they are playing to their own base, and like this, like if people from China mainland hear this, will be like, what? Because like for my side of the family, for example, my mother's side of the family, they're from Chongqing, right, which was a
Hmm.
wartime capital of China, was one of the most heavily bombed city during the World War II by the Japanese Air Force, and like for people in China to hear that would be like, what? What? And like, because in a way, it also shows the
Yeah.
kind of the disconnect, right?
You have to, you have
What
to.
the
The
kind of the
KMT
political.
is responsible for some of this though, because of their great mishandling of the return of Taiwan to China. And part of that was also because
Yeah,
of the Chinese Civil
yes,
War. Most of their attention was directed to the ongoing Civil War.
yes, yes. We definitely will get there and talk about that. Oh, we are okay. Yes. So yeah. So I mean, what as a result, of course.
That, oh, see, Japan was great to us because they did things like build the first university in Taiwan, which today is the National Taiwan University. It used to be, I think, the Imperial University of Taiwan or Taipei. It's the yeah, Taida.
Ah. Oh, and also the Taiwanese presidential palace was a former the Japanese
Yes,
colonial governor
yes.
office, right? Wasn't it? Yeah,
But by the way,
yeah.
you guys in the mainland don't call it the presidential office because I looked it up on Baidu Maps. It was called what was it called? It was called 台湾当局领导人办事场所. It's the
办事处。
no, not 办事处, 办事场所. That's what it says in Baidu Maps.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
So
yeah. How do
anyway,
you
so
translate that into English? It's the it's kind of like the office of the leader of the Taiwan administration.
yeah,
Because to
yeah,
call it the
yeah, yeah.
presidential office would be to recognize the sovereignty of the ROC
I,
government on Taiwan.
I like Taiwan regime better, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's just me. So the so that brings up to 1945 when the Empire of Japan was decisively defeated,
Yes.
and then as part of the deal, Japan had to give up all its acquired colonies, and that included Taiwan. And then by then Japan had been ruling Taiwan since what,
For 50 years.
1890?
Half a
Yeah,
century.
almost exactly 50 years. And he actually ruled Taiwan even longer than you ruled Korea. And then at this point, the we have the KMT. So the KMT, which is at the time was the ruling faction in China,
Like
Chiang
maybe not in
Kai-shek
reality
said,
for much of China, they were losing a lot of base, but under international law, they were still the legitimate government of China, unquestionable at that time.
right. At the time, I mean, at the time of 1945, at the time of Japanese surrender, actually the control of Chiang Kai-shek's regime was basically just the southwest China,
Yeah.
like just the China, like the Sichuan Basin, pretty much, and part of Guizhou, not even Yunnan, because Yunnan was under the Yunnanese warlords Long Yun, and then actually the Chiang Kai-shek, in his very sneaky way, sent Long Yun, the Yunnanese warlord army, into Vietnam to accept the Japanese surrender there. And while the Yunnanese army was gone to Vietnam, he staged a coup in Yunnan and took over and sent his own people to take over Yunnan. Like at the time of 1945, the Xinan Sansen, the Yunnan, Sichuan, Yunnan, Guizhou, pretty much what Chiang Kai-shek
Yeah.
had control
Anyways, I
directly.
really want to
And
place a lot of focus on this part because this is if you want to listen to the side of the story of the separatists, it's their interpretation of this that that makes it their legal justification for their views. Now, I'm not like, if they were truly for independent like Taiwanese state, like especially like a socialist Taiwanese state, that's whatever. But like I think there's room for discussion. But the fact of the matter is the Taiwanese independence movement as it exists today serves none other than imperialist interests. And I think if you're serving imperialist interests, that's not true independence.
Yep. I mean, I remember. So I attended a pilot, the funeral of a Chinese American pilot who was born in U.S., but he, like many Chinese Americans at the time, he went back to China during World War II, during the Japanese invasion. He joined the Guangdong Air Force. At the time, the Guangdong was controlled by the Cantonese warlord, right? No. Hui Fei Fudui is American, is a kind of American mercenary force, right? But he joined the Guangdong Air Force, like even earlier, like in the 1930s. He joined
like
Guangdong
out of
Air
patriotism.
Force. Yeah, because he, like most Chinese immigrants in U.S., he was Cantonese speaking, and then but Chiang Kai-shek never trusted the Guangdong Air Force because Guangdong army was like a warlord army, not directly under Chiang Kai-shek's control, and Chiang Kai-shek only trusted his own people, right? So the Guangdong Air Force was kind of sent to the front line as kind of cannon fodder during World War II, and many of his comrades died. And then so during the war, Chinese Civil War broke out after Japanese surrender. Like him and his buddies just decided to defect to the communists. So they flew their, because they're like, oh, we're not being appreciated by Chiang Kai-shek, like they. So they just flew over.
Friendship ended with Chiang Kai-shek. Mao Zedong's my best friend now.
Yeah, well, he joined. They joined the Communist Air Force. He became the first generation of the PLA Air Force, and then he in the 80s, I think he came back to the United States to retire or whatever. And anyway, I attended his funeral in Rosemead, California. And there was one of his friend was from Taiwan, who worked who was from the KMT, his old buddy in the KMT Air Force from back in the days, but relocated to Taiwan. And he was telling us stories like, when we work in the Taiwan airport, like the military airport, the Americans, when they do the perform maintenance, right, on the aircraft, they wouldn't even let us to get close, right? He said, like, what the fuck, it feels like we are like, this is a fucking colony here. It's like Taiwan is not really its own. Yeah, because like he said, like the Americans who are supposedly the Taiwanese allies who are on the island to defend the island against communism, whatever, but they act like the overlords. Like he said, I work with them on the airfield. They wouldn't even let us like getting close to their planes.
This is a good segue to what I'm about to get into after I introduce like the legal basis of Taiwan's retrocession to China, because the U.S. was also confused as to how to deal with Chiang Kai-shek, because they didn't really want him to be their junior partner anymore, because they wanted somebody who was more obedient, and also because Chiang Kai-shek didn't manage to keep mainland China, so he already fell out of favor.
Yeah, well, American policy on Chiang Kai-shek kind of flip-flop a lot, because initially they kind of overthrew all their support to him, and then during the Chinese, like initially at the time of the Japanese surrender, it was the American warship that sent Chiang Kai-shek's force to Taiwan, and it's American planes that airlifted Chiang Kai-shek's force from southwest to China to all the other occupied Chinese cities to accept Japanese surrender. And it was American warship and American planes that airlifted and shipped the Chiang Kai-shek's elite force from southwest China all the way to Manchuria to take over the Manchurian city from the Soviets over there. And so so Americans were deeply involved in the early part of the Chinese Civil War, but it's only like when they realize, okay, Chiang Kai-shek is losing, right? Then they're like, okay, well, maybe it's time to cut our losses, and then the attitude changed. But that in American political discourse, it turns into, oh, who lost China is because we didn't, give Chiang Kai-shek our 100% support. That's why we lost China. This kind of view was especially propped up by Henry Luce, who owns the Times.
That's so bullshit.
Yes, but Henry Luce, who is kind of like this. I don't know, like he has like Christian missionary ties with China, and was very close with the Chiang Kai-shek family, and he was like 100%, Chiang Kai-shek, you know, Chiang Kai-shek fan. But he wielded a lot of power in media, especially American media, and also among like conservative congressmen in United States. I mean, it's the same story today, really. But like, yes,
Yeah.
but he's used his media empire to kind of wage this "Who Lost China" campaign in U.S., kind of shifting the blame to like all these people in the U.S. State Department who are kind of start to leaning toward to have approached some kind of extend the olive branch to Mao's new government, right? And that,
Yeah. That's really important about what I'm
yes,
about to
go
get
ahead,
into.
go ahead, perfect,
Yeah.
go for it.
So we need to backtrack a little bit. So basically, when Taiwan was returned to China, you can already start seeing how a certain segment of America already had a conspiracy to create a situation where there was either two Chinas or there was a separate Taiwanese state from China. Now, what happened was when World War II was about to end, there was something called the Cairo Communique. It was not a formal treaty, but regardless, it becomes formalized because it is quoted in the Instrument of Surrender, which followed the terms of the Potsdam Declaration, and the eighth article of the Potsdam Declaration states that the terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out. And then I'm going to give you another direct quote from the Cairo Communique, which is, all the territories Japan has stolen from the Chinese, such as Manchuria, Formosa, which is Taiwan, the Pescadores, which is Penghu, shall be restored to the Republic of China. Right? Now, there was another thing. Japan didn't formally surrender to China until the Treaty of San Francisco was signed in 1952, which was concluded between Japan and the Allied powers without China in 1951. The treaty, it was signed in 1951. It didn't come into force until 1952. Now, China was left excluded because there was a lot of debate onto which Chinese government to allow, because the People's Republic of China had already been established by that time, and it had effective control over mainland China, whereas the United States, because of its geopolitical interests, did not want to recognize it, and they still continue to recognize the Republic of China government on Taiwan as the sole legitimate government of China. So the compromise was that China would be left out, but then under U.S. pressure, Japan would sign a separate treaty with the Chiang Kai-shek regime on April 28, 1952, which is the same day that the Treaty of San Francisco comes into force. So as you can see, it's basically like a loophole just to say that, China wasn't at the negotiating table, but then they still closed the loophole they still put it into effect by having them sign a separate treaty that pretty much came into effect at the same time. And Article 4 of the Treaty of Taipei, which is the one that they signed with Chiang Kai-shek, was, it is recognized that all treaties, conventions, and agreements concluded before December 9th, 1941 between China and Japan have become null and void as a consequence of the war, which means that the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which was signed in 1895, the one that ceded Taiwan to Japan, under international law has become null and void. Now, what the and also Article 3 says the disposition of the property of Japan and its nationals in Taiwan and Penghu, and their claims, including debts against the authority of the Republic of China in Taiwan and Penghu, and the residents thereof, and the disposition in Japan of property such as authorities, residents, and their claims, including debts against Japan, its nationals, shall be the subject of special arrangements between the government of the Republic of China and the government of Japan. And also, the Treaty of Taipei was abrogated unilaterally by the Japanese government when, as a result of the Japan-China Joint Communique, which was signed when they cut ties with the so-called ROC government and established relations with the PRC government. And under that, but a direct quote from that communique says the government of the People's Republic of China reiterates that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the territory of the People's Republic of China. And the government of Japan fully understands and respects the stand of the government of the People's Republic of China, and it firmly maintains its stand under Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation. Now, so this kind of breaks apart the legal basis of the separatists who say that the status of Taiwan is undetermined because China was not at the negotiating table during the Treaty of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And that the Cairo Communique was also not valid because there were no signatures. It was just like it was a declaration, it wasn't like formal. But then, which was okay, whatever. Just let's assume it's true because there were no signatures. But it was directly quoted in the Potsdam Declaration, which was in the Articles of Surrender by Japan, which was recognized internationally. So, I mean,
U.S. policy toward Chiang Kai-shek has gone through many, iterations. I mean, initially, before the ending of World War II, Roosevelt had envisioned China as kind of a junior partner to kind of U.S. hegemony in East Asia, kind of like Chiang Kai-shek's friendly government will be a U.S. junior partner in basically holding East Asia against the Soviet. That was a plan. And what happened then was that KMT government, through its sheer incompetence, and particularly during the 1945, the last Japanese push to link its Asian mainland during the Ichigo campaign, Japanese empire was already on its last leg in 1945, and they were able to kind of brush aside the Chiang Kai-shek's army and capture a huge swath of China. I mean, they actually successfully linked up the occupied northern China all the way to Guangzhou and all the way to Vietnam. They didn't end up to utilize like the real networks they linked up due to bombing and other stuff, but the initial objective was accomplished. And there's in Chinese it's called I think 玉桂香大溃败, which literally means the great collapse, right, of the three provinces. And this late in the game, U.S. was totally disappointed in the abilities of Chiang Kai-shek. So what they had to do was they, during the negotiation at a Yalta conference with Stalin, they tried to bring in Soviet.
My boy.
Yeah, they're trying to bring in the Soviet Union into the war against Japan to end it earlier. And in return, there are several conditions, which is recognize the formal independence of Outer Mongolia, and also kind of recognize the interest of Soviet Union, special interest of Soviet Union in Manchuria, and with that, Soviet.
So there, you can see that there is some sort of contradiction between China and the Soviet Union. Even though Mao and Stalin were allied, there was still there were still areas of which the U.S. is acutely aware of these things. So this is really important.
And what happened was that then after then quickly the Chiang Kai-shek defeat on the Chinese mainland means U.S. lost its client, like a major client. So U.S. then turned attention toward Japan. So instead of Chiang Kai-shek's China, Japan became U.S.'s junior partner in Northeast Asia. Became like this.
Yeah.
That's led up to the situation today. Defeated Japan, then actually by twists and turns of history became like the junior partner of U.S. to enforce the U.S. hegemony in Asia. And so that's how we got to the situation, the ambiguous situation with Taiwan. But time rolling to 1945, the boatloads of KMT soldiers landed in Taiwan. This is the first time in Chinese troops land in Taiwan in 50 years.
And this is very significant in Taiwan because although there's always been a significant presence of Han Chinese, they were largely from the Guangdong and Fujian provinces, mostly Fujian province. Now, this is the first time that there were that many like Han Chinese people from so many other provinces.
Yes.
It greatly introduced the it greatly diversified Taiwan's population and its cuisine. For example, my grandmother can't eat spicy foods because spicy foods weren't introduced to Taiwan until around this time, which was she was already was past her formative years, but so it wasn't something she grew up with as a kid. Whereas nowadays, with all the people from your area and because it so happens that the Air Force Academy of the ROC was in Chengdu, and they eat a lot of spicy food, and then the Air Force Academy got relocated to Gangshan and around Kaohsiung. And then there's a lot of people from Chengdu relocated in southern Taiwan that just introduced a lot of their spicy cuisines. So.
Oh yeah, I forgot
things like this.
Because this is what.
Oh, I want to settle this. I want to settle the debate. There's a debate on whether Niu Rou Mian is Sichuanese or if it's Taiwanese.
Okay.
And here's the story. You had the Air Force Academy. You had all those Chengdu people. They went to Taiwan and then they wanted, you go anywhere you want to eat food from your home. So then they created the Gangshan Doubanjiang, which is Doubanjiang but made with materials that they could find in their area. And then from that, they created their style of the beef noodle soup, which is now called Taiwanese beef noodle soup abroad, but in Taiwan it's called Sichuan beef noodle soup.
Ah, that totally makes sense because many of my listeners already know I'm from Chongqing, right, which used to be part of Sichuan. Well, basically same cultural area. And when I moved to United States, I would go to these malls, Taiwanese shopping malls that would serve Taiwanese beef noodle soup. I'm always thinking, what's so special about this? What I mean, this is the same beef noodle. I mean, back home we also have beef noodle soup. Why is this? What makes this Taiwanese beef noodle soup? But thank you for shedding that historical context. This is perfect. We're
so we're talking about the conspiracy. I'm going to let you talk about that more, but I want to talk about the conspiracy of the U.S. on how to deal with Chiang Kai-shek a little bit.
Yes.
So. 1949 February, U.S. diplomat Livingston T. Merchant was sent by is his name pronounced Atchison?
Yes.
Yeah. He was sent by Atchison to Taiwan on a field mission to see if a government autonomous from China could be set up. So he met with chairman of the Taiwan provincial government, Chen Cheng, and made these offers. If Chen Cheng separated the provincial government from the national government and then cut off communications with the communists. I mean, he's not implying that there were ties to begin with, but if he was willing to isolate the communists with the U.S. is basically what he meant. The U.S. will send $25 million of aid annually, and then as a formality, the Allied forces will occupy Taiwan, and a meeting on the transfer of power to the new government will take place. And after this meeting takes place, the U.S. will send its Navy and Air Force to the Taiwan Strait to maintain order, prevent hostilities, prevent attack. And then at this time, because they knew that Chiang Kai-shek was pretty much fucked, if he wanted to go to Taiwan, he would have to go as a political refugee, which means he wouldn't have power anymore. But Merchant made the offer to the wrong person because Chen Cheng was loyal to Chiang Kai-shek. And although he was also an anti-communist, both of them were Chinese nationalists who refused to separate Taiwan from the mainland.
And
So this
this is not US's only attempt either, because they also try to prop up Sun Lizhen. So Sun Lizhen is He's a KMT general who led the Chinese expedition force into Burma during World War II, because at the time, the only way overland supply route into China was through Burma, through the back door into southwest China, and
They were also trap lords.
There were, I'm sorry,
Trap lords.
there were what?
Trap lords, like the big drug dealers, like in the Golden Triangle in
Yes,
Burma.
yes.
Yeah, that's how they made money. They worked with the CIA, and like the opium went on Pan Am flights.
Yes. We probably should devote a separate.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that.
That's basically the remnant of KMT army in northern Burma that ended up, basically creating the so-called Golden Triangle, the infamous drug growing, smuggling region that supplied, opiates, heroin to much of the world, with CIA help. But back in so Sun Lizhen led the Chinese expedition force into northern Burma during World War II to basically try to rescue the British army getting trapped by the Japanese invasion force. And then he later was pushed to India, to northeast India, where the Chinese expedition force was reorganized and trained and equipped by Americans. So Sun Lizhen had a very close tie with Americans, and later that his army, the first corps, 第一新一军, the new first corps, became like the most elite force in KMT. And also, Americans would airlift them to Manchuria to basically fight the Chinese Civil War against the communists. But Sun Lizhen, because his close tie with Americans, there was an attempt to install him as like a new military leader in Taiwan. And of course, Chiang Kai-shek, through his spy network, got wind of this, and he placed Sun Lizhen under house arrest. So there's kind of like a trying relationship between the Chiang Kai-shek regime and the U.S. And there was also a time where I think it was in the 60s that basically suspicious of U.S. trying to do another coup against him, Chiang Kai-shek basically instigated another riot, anti-American riot in Taipei. But it kind of sparked off by an incident that really shows kind of the colonial nature of Taiwan.
Yeah, there was this guy killed by the U.S.
Yes, because supposedly, according to the U.S. official version, it was an American officer who claimed that there was a peeping tom outside watching his wife shower, and he went out and fired pistols, and of course he killed somebody, and that somebody, it turns out, interestingly, was none other than, like, he was part of the Chiang Kai-shek spy network, like kind of pretty high in the KMT intelligence.
Both stories could be
yes. I mean, and then after that, there was a huge anti-American riot basically broke out in Taiwan. Because, of course, like the American trying to claim immunity and claim that he was self-defense, right? After shooting this guy. But that was just kind of the general atmosphere in Taiwan at the time. Like at the time, even in the 1960s, Americans not necessarily seen as, the defenders of democracy or the great liberator. they were seen kind of as the overbearing colonial overlords they are. And because at the time, after 1945, not only U.S. had a military presence there, I believe U.S. had stationed nuclear weapon in Taiwan for a time. I have to double check on that.
They did in South Korea, so it wouldn't surprise me if they did it in
Yeah.
Taiwan.
Like they had to withdraw basically after 1972, after Nixon met Mao in China. So that there's a, before, the military presence in Taiwan was quite heavy. Um,
Especially during the Vietnam War.
yes, and that also, the other kind of the South Korea also get pulled in. So all these kind of the American client state gets pulled in the U.S. adventure in East Asia. But what I want to get back to is, there was a scene described by one of the pro independence Taiwan activists. He talked about the scene in 1945 when he sees the first boatloads of KMT soldiers landing in Taiwan. And he said, "Oh yeah, everyone at the time was very excited. Everyone was very excited to finally, ending the status of the Japanese colony and became, welcoming be welcomed back to the motherland." But then he himself was very disappointed to see these very shabbily dressed KMT soldiers who dressed like beggars. He felt like that was a sharp contrast between like smartly dressed, Japanese Imperial Army soldiers. And then he started having questions like, who are these people coming over to take us over, right? Like these people who speak strange languages and who are, worse off than we are, because in Taiwan, at the time, it was still materially, it was better off than much of mainland China, which was ravaged by World War II. Taiwan, despite its bombings, it still had, decent infrastructure, education system, et cetera, et cetera. And
I want to contrast this story with another guy after you're done.
go ahead.
There is a guy in Taiwan. He's there was a Taiwanese communist named what's her name? Xie Xuehong.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this wasn't her story, but he was connected with her during the 228 massacre incident, which we will get to later. But he was the son of a landowner. I'm not sure if he was like a wealthy landlord family, but he was not like a lower peasant. And he realized that the relationship between Taiwanese people and their Japanese colonial overlords were kind of similar to the relationship between the big landlords and the poor peasants and the middle peasants in the countryside of Taiwan. Because he realized that he never accomplished anything in his life, but he was a kid. But then like the lower peasants would treat him as if he were almost like their elder or something, like that sort of respect. And he saw that as very unjust. And then as he grew up, he saw more of the he grew more dissatisfied with Japanese rule, especially after he had gotten into a fight with some Japanese kid at his school. They told him he beat the kid up, and afterwards he was surrounded and beaten because they were saying that, okay, it's okay to get into a fight with the Japanese, but it's not okay to win.
Wow.
So then, yeah, but then he also grew very disappointed with the KMT. But unlike your story where he was like, okay, well, then we want Japan, he realized that he said that dignity was also very important. He became a Chinese nationalist, but not like KMT nationalist, but you know what I mean. So then he said, I no longer want the white motherland. I want the red motherland.
And by motherland,
which means
China.
I no longer white China, like the white army, white reaction. He doesn't want the reactionary. He is on the side with the communists. And up until the Korean War, it was pretty much everyone thought that okay, Chiang Kai-shek's pretty much fucked, and people kind of knew that Mao was going to go at any time, and that was the plan. Mao did plan on liberating Taiwan in 1950, but there is a saying in Chinese, 计划赶不上变化. How would you translate that?
The plans can't catch up with the changes, I guess.
Yeah. But before we get into the Korean War, I think now that
Well,
we mentioned
before
this,
we jump into Korean War, we have to talk about 228 because
228,
that's a
which is what I'm
big,
getting into now.
big. I mean, we're actually just building into the big climax of the big Taiwanese revolt against the KMT rule right after 19
So,
after
yes.
the post-war handover. Can we stop? Make this a stopping point because it's been 3 hours. I really need to grab something to eat. And is it possible to continue this at another time? Because I feel this is a good stopping point because right now it's going to be the big. We're leading to that big blow up, right? The 228. Yes, and this is in our when we return, we're gonna discuss the big Taiwanese resistance against a revolt against the KMT rule in Taiwan, the 228 incident, which have reverberation to this day in the political scene on Taiwan, but often its history is getting distorted and mythologized. And we are here to debunk the myth and to lay out the facts.
And also, I guess on an ending note, I just want everybody to remember: keep in mind the different ways of Han immigration in Taiwan. Keep in mind the different ethnic groups in Taiwan, and also keep in mind that Taiwan had been colonized by Japan, so you had Han Chinese with a different mentality than the new set of Han Chinese who were entering.
Yes, very different.
And then they are divided into two camps. The first, if you were a Han Chinese who was already in Taiwan prior to 1945, you were called a Benshengren, which is native it means of this somebody of this province. People afterwards were called Waishengren, which is extra provincial people. Now keep this in mind because the KMT was because pretty much the KMT came from the mainland afterwards, and then as a result of I guess identity reductionism, all Waishengren were pretty much just attributed with the new government. So then there is a huge this ties into all of the contradictions that happen in Taiwan, in addition to all the class contradictions. You have like these pro-Japanese intellectuals. You had like these huge landowners who they pretty much just sided with whoever was in power, and then you had like the poor peasants, the working class and stuff. So all of this is very important to what's about to come up in the next episode.
And I will just go very briefly. Probably also helps to discuss the KMT rule on mainland China. They pretty much imported all their problems into Taiwan, and that's where we get this big blow up in 228 when all the.
I guess that's where we'll start off next time with a brief introduction of the final years of the KMT on mainland China and its implications on Taiwan.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Xiangyu. This has been 3-hour tour, and we're looking forward to the next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll be talking more next time because as we get into more modern history, and I can share some, I guess, anecdotes and whatnot, it should hopefully it makes an interesting episode. But yeah, thanks a lot for like filling in a lot about the early history. My plan today was just to like go over the early history, just like, okay, bam, this happened, okay, now this happens. But I think this will set the stage even better, especially now during the COVID-19, everybody staying at home with less better things to do than they would have had.
Yes.
What I imagine more listeners
to enjoy your self quarantine, then listen to Steel and Silk and Steel podcast. Thank you.
Go out less, listen to Silk and Steel
more. listen
to my music too. I would tell you guys to follow me on Twitter, but Twitter doesn't like me.
Where can people find you?
Instagram.
Okay, and your Instagram handle?
Facebook. But my Facebook is my Instagram is Comrade Xiangyu, COMRADEXIANGYU.
Okay, and is it the same on the Instagram or Facebook?
No, I don't have a Twitter.
No. Your Facebook and Instagram is the same handle?
Yeah, my Facebook page is in
Oh,
Chinese, but you can still follow it and use Google Translate. I'll talk less about this sort of stuff. I tread really carefully because on my Facebook, my views are still the same, but because of certain sensitive topics, I word things in a certain way so as not to like, you know what I mean. Yeah, I had to keep some of the separatists happy. I can't piss all of them off at the same time.
You can't piss off animals.
I piss off different segments of them like separately. I divide and
Yeah,
conquer.
yeah, I understand. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to next time.
All right, yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, bye bye.